This is Nicholas Alexiou from the Hellenic American Project, Department of Sociology, Queen's College CUNY. And today we're very honored, happy, and really in debt to have an interview with Dr. Coufoudakis, a renowned researcher and scholar that he has spent many years studying and teaching, and we're very pleased to have you here today, Dr. Coufoudakis. Van, thank you very much for accepting having an interview in the series of the Hellenic American Project. Van Coufoudakis is a professor emeritus of political science and Dean Emeritus of the College of Arts and Sciences, Indiana University, Purdue University. Also, Rector Emeritus of the University of Nicosia in Nicosia, Cyprus. Between 2012 and 2014, he served as President of the Hellenic Quality Assurance and Accreditation Agency of the Government of Greece. He has authored and edited several books and over 100 articles published in academic journals and books in the United States and Europe. He holds a PhD from the University of Michigan and honorary doctorates from Indiana University and from the University of Nicosia. In 1998, the President of Greece awarded him the decoration of the Order of the Phoenix for his contributions to Hellenic letters. Some of his principal publications as an editor with Eugene Rosidis, the United States and Cyprus, Double Standards and the Rule of Law in 2002, editor with our own from Queen's College, Harry Psomiadi and Andrei Gerolimaton, also affiliated with Queen's College, Greece and the New Balkans, Challenges and Opportunities in 1999, The Cyprus Question, International Politics and the Failure of Peacemaking in Theodore Kouloumbis and others in 2003, and US Foreign Policy in the wake of September 11th and Global Dialogue in 2002. Van, you have a very long biographical sketch, so we'll have a chance to talk about what you do more in our conversations. Thank you for being here today. And I would like to start with the early years, where you were born and raised, and some indication for the family roots, your parents.
Αυτό είναι πιθανώς, this is the most interesting part in many ways. Look, I was born in Athens, of a typical Greek diaspora family. My father and his family, their roots are from the island of Andros. And sometime in the 19th century, they made it across the Aegean to Izmir. That's where they had businesses. And of course, they were there until 1922, when they were expelled after the destruction of Smyrna and came back to Greece as refugees. My mother and her family come from, again, Asia Minor. They come from the area known as Alexandretta. The Turks call it Iskenderun. They took it away from Syria in 1928. And the result is that, again, even though we have families still in that part of Turkey, and I have been there several times over the years, the reality is we're a typical diaspora Greek family. What most people don't know is that I have a double name. It's a hyphenated name. My real name is Petrucci. That's the name that came out of the island of Andros, the village of Arne. Probably Venetian or Genovese roots. Coufoudakis είναι paratsouchli, as they say in Greek, because one of the great-great-grandparents, as a child, fell down, hit his head, lost his hearing, and Koufos, as you know in Greek, means deaf. And because the kid was little, Coufoudakis, the diminutive. Coufoudakis has prevailed, but if you look even at citizenship papers of my parents in Turkey, until about 1900, the Petrucci name was the predominant, the prevalent name. Slowly it disappears. It exists in all our passports and things like that. But so that's part of my unknown past for many people, the double name. Sometimes I use both names. Most of the time, people know me by Coufoudakis.
Very, very interesting. So you grew up in Andros, right?
No, I grew up in Exarchia, right downtown Athens. I was born there in 1938. I lived there through World War II, the Civil War, and eventually I came to the US in 1955 when I was 17 years old.
As a child, your parents or the family circle having roots from Asia Minor, you used to hear stories people wanted to talk about what happened there, and also how was the mainland Greeks received people from Asia Minor, knowing that they were from Asia Minor?
You know, again, my parents were fairly well-educated people. They had no difficulty adapting to the Greek lifestyle, and yet from them I heard a great deal about the history of life in Smyrna, and also from my mother in Iskenderun, Alexandretta. And the reality is that my curiosity had been activated about who I am, my background, and so on. My father spoke lovingly of his years in Turkey. My mother spoke in the same manner about her life in Alexandretta. So I always had good memories from them as to what life may have been over there. I have never been to Izmir. I've only been to Iskenderun, where my mother was born and raised, and to actually the house of her parents that still exists in downtown Iskenderun. The life in Athens for me was an experience because, again, I was born in 1938. World War II came soon thereafter. I remember quite a bit from the war because of the German occupation. I remember quite a bit from the difficulties in the early years of the war, including the hunger, including the difficulties with dealing with Germans and Italians. The Italians were the worst to deal with. Germans were not really as bad as the Italians were. And in that sense, I learned tolerance. My father was a person that had lived through a great deal of stuff. My father was involved in the Greek underground during World War II. They were able to get a lot of Athenian Jews and Greek military and British military out of danger and ship them off to Turkey and to Egypt and places like that. My father had some really risky moments in his life that he has talked to me at length about. And they're part of the kind of family folklore that I bring with me. And at this time, in 2022, when we're talking about, again, wars in Europe and things like that, those of us that grew up during a war in Europe are sensitized to the kind of issues that we're talking about today: destruction, killing of innocent people, and things like that.
You mentioned that you lived in Exarchia.
Yes.
For some time now, Exarchia is considered one of the most radical regions of Greece, and Athens in particular. It was a center of exchanging ideas, of artists, of creativity. it was always like that. You have memories of Exarchia like that. I know it was a normal development because of the war and all this, but it was, you're aware of the presence of artists and other radicals there?
Oh God, yes. I mean, when I grew up, Exarchia was a very peaceful neighborhood. Everybody knew his neighbors. The neighbors knew us as children, which kept us from misbehaving on top of that, you know, because if we did something wrong, they would talk to my parents, for example, that kind of thing. It was a very stable neighborhood. We lived right around the corner from the famous Ble Polykatikia and the movie theater Vox in the heart of Exarchia. It was a wonderful community to live in. It was peaceful. Everybody knew each other, and it was a safe neighborhood. We went to play up on the Lofos of Strefi, in the playgrounds up there. It was a wonderful place to grow up. I have very fond memories from my days in Exarchia. And it's very sad, when I was in Athens working for the accreditation agency in Greece in 2012, one Sunday afternoon, I took a walk to my old neighborhood. It was depressing to see what has happened to my neighborhood that I knew so well. And it was not, let's say, you had not the feeling of unease about being in the neighborhood where I grew up as a child, and everybody was happy, everybody knew each other, everybody was very friendly to each other. My neighborhood, when I went there, I promised myself never again.
Interesting. And then it comes a moment where you have to decide to stay in Greece, in Athens, or to come to the States. But you are very young at that age, right? Tell us about the circumstances. Yeah.
I was, my parents sent me to Ionios Scholi. Ionios Scholi was one of the best private schools in Athens at the time. It was located on Akademias, Zoodorou Pigis, and Harilaou Trikoupi, in a historic building that dates back to about 1805, 1806. The French Archaeological School had been housed there. Mavrokordatos lived there in one of the houses on the lot. The building had walls. I'll never forget that. The building had stone walls that not even a nuclear war could have ever taken down that building, let's put it that way. The school was great. All the Greek that I know, I learned there. I stayed there until my 17th year. And there, one lovely day, we had a visit from the Cultural Affairs Office of the US Embassy. And they talked to us about scholarships to go to the US to finish high school. Well, I got very excited. I went home. I told my parents. Now, coming from a typical middle-class Athenian family, here's a kid that had not even turned 17 yet. I was 16 years old when this whole thing happened. And I told my parents that, look, I have a chance to take a scholarship to go to the States. They didn't want to say no to me. They did not discourage me because they never did that. But at the same time, they're very concerned about how does a kid of my age go across the Atlantic? Well,
and knowing nobody in the States, right?
And knowing nobody in the States. Of course, the scholarships were very well organized. It was the American Field Service, an American group that really operated during World War I in Europe with hospital services, things like that. And after the First World War, they decided to dedicate themselves to, quote, international understanding. And the scholarships for the high school came as a result of World War II, basically. I passed a number of tests, And one lovely day in the fall of 1954, I was told that I had been selected to go to the States. They didn't know, of course, where, not know the school. They did not know the family that would take me as their child and things like that. And from about the fall of 1954 to May of 1955, the whole thing was up in the air. One day in May, we received a package, a huge package from the US in the mail that said, you have been selected, you're going to go to school in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, good grief. I mean, we knew Chicago, we knew New York, we knew basic parts of the US. We went to the Coufoudakis encyclopedia, opened up the map of the United States to see where in the world is St. Paul, Minnesota. And we found out where it was. It was a wonderful idea. A letter came immediately from the host family explaining to me, bring winter clothes with you, do this, do that, and everything. I was very lucky in many ways because I was the first foreign student to ever go to the high school where I was assigned. The family that hosted me had no children, which is rare because in most cases, the AFS preferred families with children to make the adaptation easier. But in my case, it turned out to be a wonderful experience. A young couple had a baby that died along the way, and I became their child. I had a wonderful time. There were very warm people, hospitable people. Anybody at the age of 17 who arrives in the States, and it was quite a trip because we left Athens, we took Olympia, the liner, and we went to Naples. From Naples, we took the train to Rome. From Rome, we took the overnight train to Paris, where we met all the other scholarship recipients. We stayed at the Cité Universitaire at the American House in Paris for 2 weeks. And again, 2 weeks in Paris for a 17-year-old, you realize what an experience that was. And then we took the train from Paris to Cherbourg. We took Nea Elas, the liner from Cherbourg to New York, an adventure of 7 days. We landed in New York. We had a week-long orientation in New York City by AFS. And then we were put on Greyhound buses and shipped off to where we're going to do our senior year in high school. So that was
a young Odysseus, a young Ulysses.
Yes,
I was a good trip, but of course very, very interesting. Before we go and you tell us your first impressions from Minnesota, I want to go back a little bit. The tests that you took at your school was in which language? Was in Greek or in English?
English,
Because
you had to be fluent.
Yes.
And the good thing was that at Ionios, we had both French and English as part of the curriculum. And the year before I went to the States, we had a friend of ours from Illinois who stayed in Athens, and I became pretty much the guide and polished up my English quite well. And that helped.
This is very, very interesting for many, many reasons. I will mention one or two here, and I would like your opinion here, because we examine the relation between structure and agency, because in the 50s was a very poor and underdeveloped country, and at the same time we see the pioneering vision of the school, of the institution in many different languages to enable and empower young students. So you see the role of the institutions, that it wasn't very typical for Greece or other places. So this is a very interesting point, how that rules out. And of course, all these connections, because it's not easy to make that connection between the American embassy, the families here, the bureaucracies. So that takes a lot of work. And who organizes all this? And do you think those things still exist or they have changed?
I don't think American Field Service exists any longer, but it did significant good work. And to me, again, remember, 1955 was at the end of the Cold War, I mean, at the end of World War II. The Cold War was at its height. Now, today, people travel, pick up the phone, dial direct Athens and everything. In 1955, once I got to the States, in order to talk to my parents, the only way to do it was either sending a telegram saying, I'm well, I have arrived. Otherwise, it took whatever length of time it took for a letter to go from the US to Athens. Otherwise, making a telephone call back then was quite an ordeal. The wonderful thing about going to Minnesota was it is a kind of an interesting location. The people are of Scandinavian background. Now Minnesota is very different ethnically compared to what it was, that many years back. But it was a welcoming place. They did not, my school never ever had a foreign student before me. So when I arrived there, I was like the strange animal from overseas. I was pampered. I had the most positive experiences as far as being welcomed and made to feel at home from the moment I set foot in the door of that school.
But they had a sense that you were Greek, right?
Of course.
And people knew about Greece, about probably antiquity, right? Or Greece during the Second World War. So they were aware of those things, or you have to tell them.
Let's put it this way. The funniest experience I had probably about a month after school started, that we're talking probably about October 1955. I was called to the principal's office and they said to me, there is an evangelical church down the street from the school and they heard about you and they would like you to go to talk to them about Greece and Greece today. Would you like to do that? AFS had told us, of course, definitely that's part of your mission to talk to people about your country of origin and all that. So I dressed up in a nice suit and a tie and all that kind of stuff. And off I went to talk to the evening gathering at the evangelical church down the street. We had a nice discussion until a moment when an older lady got up and said to me, excuse me, the suit you have on, where did you get it? I said, in Greece. She looked stunned, completely stunned. I'll never forget that. She said, so you wear suits like that in Greece today? Yes, ma'am. Stunned, again, she looks at me and says, but what happened to those robes that you people used to wear? The togas, I said, well, that's a long time ago. Today we dress the way you do. I mean, she was very apologetic. I said, there is nothing to apologize because, yes, we have a long history and we used to dress differently then than what we do now. But it was funny because they did, remember, 1955, people were not traveling the way they do now. So it was still the experience of learning about other cultures. Yes, Americans had gone to fight a war in Europe, but that's a different experience than, say, being a tourist, the way tourists go to Greece today to both do sightseeing and whatever else they do. So it was an interesting experience. I was welcomed wherever I went. And that, to me, was the best part of learning about life in the US. I learned long down the road about problems, social problems in the US. One day, one of my social studies teachers decided to take me downtown St. Paul to show me what he called the ghetto. And I asked him, what is the ghetto? I had heard about the word ghetto, about the Jewish ghettos in Europe and all that. He says, do you know that we have Black people here? I had never seen a Black person in St. Paul the first 3 months I was there. And they took me there. They took me even to an NAACP meeting. And that opened up my eyes because I never knew that St. Paul, Minnesota had a Black population, African-American population, that there are problems in St. Paul, Minnesota, and things like that. I remember when I went back to the family that I lived with, and I told them that, guess what I did today? I went down to the ghetto in St. Paul. The people almost had a stroke. You did what? And I explained to them how I ended up going to an NAACP meeting on top of that. They're very understanding, but they were very, very concerned about what impressions I was going to get from the US. Again, remember, 1955, the civil rights movement was just barely getting underway at the time.
In the 60s, it was that famous book, The Other America, that it was the beginning of understanding or being able to express. And of course, it was also the beginning, the very early period of the second mass immigration movement from Greece to the States.
Yes.
It opened up in the 60s later. So all this time, you have any chance to meet other Greeks there?
No.
It wasn't much.
AFS discouraged any kind of contact with Greeks for the first 6 months of my stay there. And I don't blame them, because it would have been, I think, difficult to learn the English that I did as quickly as I did, had I gone into a Greek environment where I would just let loose on my Greek and be happy the rest of the time. My contact with the Greek community in St. Paul started probably early 1956. So I had already been there about 6 months. So the experiences were wonderful. When I went back to Greece because part of the condition of the scholarship was that upon completion of the degree, I would go back to Greece. As soon as I went back, I knew I had to continue in the American system for higher education. I tried to go into the Athens Polytechnic. It didn't work, the exams and all that kind of stuff. I took my Greek high school diploma exams. And soon afterwards, one Sunday afternoon, I found out in the newspaper an announcement that the American University of Beirut was offering full scholarships to European students. And I thought, oh my God, this is it. Monday morning, I called up the US Embassy. I said, this is who I am. I just came from the States. I have a high school diploma from Harding High School in St. Paul, Minnesota. I would like to apply to one of the scholarships for AUB in Beirut. I drove, we went again through interviews and tests and things like that. My grades from the high school in Minnesota were excellent. I graduated with honors and all that kind of stuff. So one lovely morning, I was accepted to go to AUB, all expenses paid. I was lucky because, first of all, Beirut in 1958, when I got there, was a wonderful place to be. I landed in Beirut probably about 48 hours after the Marines had landed in Beirut, when Eisenhower sent the Marines in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War. And I stayed there from 1958 to 1962. And then From Beirut, I got another scholarship for the University of Michigan, and I came back to the States because I knew this is where my life was going to be. I had positive experiences from high school.
So, I would like to know if the issue of citizenship or nationality played a role. So it was an American school in Beirut, but you had an American citizenship or nationality because you came here, or you had only Greek citizenship?
Only Greek citizenship. I became a US citizen in 1968. By then, I had lost my Greek citizenship, unfortunately. The junta had put me through a court-martial in 1968 and had revoked my Greek citizenship, among other things, which I have regained since then. And
we'll come to that. Let's stay a little bit. No, I want to know, because this is very interesting also to see that an American university in a place like Beirut of that time, as you said. I remember, because I had relatives there also. It was a nickname. It was a little Paris. This is how they call it.
yes, look,
multicultural, multilingual.
It was
yeah.
the cultural center of the Middle East.
Yes.
And I have some of the warmest memories of the hospitality of the Lebanese people. Yeah. I can tell you some of the crazy things I have done.
Yes, we like to have that.
Including hitchhiking.
Yeah, hold on. Because
hitchhiking across Lebanon and across the Middle East. I never felt threatened. It was a wonderful experience.
This is important because you already have an abroad experience coming to America. You already feel you have opened your horizons for a few years ago. Now you are older, more mature. You're 20 years old, but you already have the experience of being abroad, and you are in a very multicultural area. How was? I would like to hear the story with hijacking, but also how people receive you, knowing that you are Greek. To see being Greek in the Middle East at that time, what it meant.
What it meant.
I guess you were received as a white, right?
Let me tell you two things about that. One was that my hair, right now, there isn't very much of it left, but back when I was young, was totally blonde, and I was blue-eyed. And talking to Lebanese, telling them that you're Greek, they would look at me and say, no, you cannot be Greek because Greeks are like us, dark eyes, dark hair. Anyway, when we would overcome the issue, are you really Greek, and not faking it, they thought I was German or English or something like that. The hospitality was immense. I have never felt more comfortable in a foreign country as I did the years I was in Beirut.
It wasn't dangerous to do hijacking?
Not really. Because those days, with the exception of Syria, where things were touch and go, Beirut, Jordan, even Syria were very, very hospitable. And if you behaved and more or less according to the customs, the local customs, and did not offend anybody, you did very well. I never felt threatened during any of the years that I spent in Beirut.
And also the language, the Greek language also was spoken there, right?
Yes. We learned very quickly that when you're downtown in Beirut, in particular, in the shopping areas, the last thing you need to do is talk in Greek and say something nasty about either the shopkeeper or a customer in the shop or something like that, because most of the shops in the downtown of Beirut were Armenian owned, and by God, they knew Greek better than we did. And if you said something about the product not being good or something else about other customers, boy, you were in trouble. And we found that out very quickly. So you did not speak Greek when you knew that chances are the person sitting across from you understood you perfectly well.
At school, you met other Greeks.
Yes, we were several that came on that scholarship program, and I'm very proud to say that I'm still in very close contact with several of the people we went to Beirut as undergraduate students, and it created a kind of a fellowship among us. You know, that we still 40 years, 50 years later, you know, we're still talking to each other. When I go to Greece, I meet with my AUB classmates, you know, very positive experiences back then. And I'll tell you something else. Again, I come from a family that has immigrant roots, you know, in a variety of ways. Some of my family did not belong to the correct political side, let's put it that way. You know what happened in Greece with the Civil War and all those things. Two of my cousins were the ones that did the first hijacking of a Greek aircraft in 1948, when they took a TAE plane from Athens to Thessaloniki. These are my cousins. In order to be able to get πιστοποιητικό κοινωνικών φρονημάτων, that was absolutely necessary to get a passport, it took quite an effort, thanks to one of my neighbors in Athens, who was a well-known professor of administrative law at the University of Athens, who more or less vouched for me that I was a decent person and I came from, quote, a decent family. So for me, going to the States was the first big break for me. Second big break was the scholarship that took me to Beirut, because it didn't cost any money. My parents could not have done those things for me, even if they wanted to. So those scholarships opened my eyes, they opened new doors for my career, and I knew that I had to continue in the States after that. And again, scholarships from the University of Michigan kept me into the graduate programs of Michigan and all that, and then the rest is history.
An amazing story, but it's very easy to see that the cosmopolitanism that being Greek, was very strong at that time. This is very interesting to see. So you got a degree in '72 from the University of Michigan, and then you started your academic career. Let's talk about that.
By 1967, I was working on my PhD dissertation. Market was very tight for social sciences, particularly political science. So I had a very interesting call one day about a vacancy in the California system in Los Angeles. And I applied, I got accepted. The only problem was that I got a letter from the university saying that we're offering you the position pending budget approval. Those three terrible little words, pending budget approval. Well, that was the year that Reagan was governor of California. And of course, he froze the education budget of California. And guess what? Coufoudakis was left without a job. Depressed, because by then I was married, I wanted to get into the job market and become a regular academic. And one lovely day, I got a call from Indiana University, from the Indiana University system, that said, we saw your name among the graduates of the political science department. Are you still in the market? Yes, I am. Would you come down for an interview? Yes, I would. I came through a major snowstorm that hit the Midwest that week. I made it to Bloomington after hours and hours of travel from Michigan to Bloomington, Indiana, went through my interviews that were again spectacular in many ways, because two of the key people that interviewed me at the University at Indiana University had been at the American University of Beirut as faculty. And suddenly we found common roots, common people we knew. That interview went so well that indeed I was hired in the Indiana system, and I decided to leave to get my career done at Indiana. It gave me wonderful opportunities.
So how many years you lived in Indiana?
35 years. And I can say it was a wonderful experience. Yeah, I had the difficulty was with all my travel, because throughout my career, I traveled a great deal for lectures, meetings, consulting, and all that. It was not the easiest place to get out of Indiana and go to Washington, to New York, or to Europe and places like that. But it worked out. And Indiana gave me a very good academic environment to work in. My work was appreciated, particularly both at the West European Center and the Russian and East European Center, because they had experts on all the fields of Europe except Greece. Indiana University Bloomington had Argyris Fatouros, a very well-known international lawyer, when I first got there. But overall, they did not have very many people interested in Greece, the Balkans, and things like that. And I became a kind of a connecting link. And that helped because it helped my career. It helped the reputation of Indiana University when they were applying for grants, that they had people engaging in Greece and Cyprus and things like that. And that made my career a lot more interesting and a lot more challenging.
So Indiana had and still has a well-established Greek American community. What was your connection with the community, or you know, any contacts, any interaction?
In Indianapolis, I knew some of the Greeks there, but in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I had a lot of connections with the community there, both because they were, let's say, a strong community. They had their own church and things like that. I even became president of the community for several years. In terms of the Greeks that we saw there, we had two generations, basically. One that had come to the US around 1905. And these are mainly Greeks from Peloponnesus, Tripoli, Spati, and those areas. That generation slowly was dying off as when I got there in 1967. And the big mistake that I did not, that I committed, was that I had plans to do oral interviews with some of those people about their experiences in Indiana, which was a Germanic state, heavily Germanic state in the Midwest. Then the next generation came after the Civil War. That was the second big influx of Greeks. It came primarily from Macedonia, Kastoria, Florina, those areas, and they brought along with them a variety of other political problems with the Bulgarians, the so-called Macedonians, and of course the Greek community. That's a story in itself. And yet the community was very hospitable. I spent a lot of time dealing with community issues, particularly as president of the community for a number of years. And we enjoyed the life of the Midwest.
So when it comes to self-identification, how you understand yourself as an American, as a Greek American, as an American Greek? What is something, you know, that you can, you know, say, you can tell about yourself as far as concerned ethnic identity?
Look, I have not lost my Greek background, but having come early to the US, I felt very much part of the American society. And therefore, I dealt with economic, political, pretty much as any other American would have done. And I think that helped me both professionally and personally, that even though I had a very strong belief in my Greek background, and I gave a lot of time and effort to promoting that background, I still was very much of the American community. I was very much active in the politics of the Democratic Party in Indiana. John Bradimus and all the wonderful people that were there at the time. And I did not feel that I was a foreigner. In many ways, I felt very much part of both the Greek community, but also very much part of an American community, thinking and acting within an American context.
It is very interesting to me because we spoke before, and I know how well Greek you speak, and this is very intriguing to me because you went to American schools, either from high school to universities. You taught in American universities. You lived in America for all these years, and still you kept your language in high standards. How you managed?
I owe that to Ionios Scholi. What Greek I know, because I've never finished high school there or anything like that. What Greek I know is what I learned at Ionios. It was a tough school, but I did well. And I can still write, and I can still spell Greek and all that stuff. So not bad for someone who is 84 years old.
Very interesting. Well, because
now, the other thing that helped, of course, in my Americanization is that while I was at the University of Michigan, I met my wife. And we've been married for 57 years. We're going to our 58th year very soon. That's a long time. My wife is not of Greek background. Her mother's side comes from Malta. So there is a Mediterranean connection there. But my wife has become a better Greek than I am in many ways, observing the holidays and doing all the good things that Greeks do.
You have a long experience as president of the community, and because of the location of the university here at Queen's College, which is in Queens, close to Astoria, and my involvement with the community and the reach out program we have, I know that the concern of most of the associations, the ethnic or otherwise, it is the continuity of language. So I guess that was the case in Indiana when you were president. So how come, and on one hand, because of a strong educational system in the Ionian school in Athens, the language remained over the years, and here we are very ambivalent, or not very successful in transmitting the Greek language or teaching the Greek language to the younger generation. How you understand that? Do you think that the future Greek Americans will continue speaking Greek?
No. Partially because we're not good with foreign languages in the US. And that's true of Greek or any other foreign language. Second, because we have not really, we as Greek Americans have not really made a good faith effort to cultivate the need to learn Greek. Those of us who have had the experience of Greek school in the parishes, these are tragic experiences, because when you lump people from 5 years old to 55 in the same classroom, and you slap them a couple of times if they don't say the right Greek word, that's not learning. And kids have a different way of learning foreign languages today. The sad thing to me is that while we have so many modern Greek studies programs across the US, and all of these programs to a large degree have been created thanks to donations that have come from the Greek American community, from the Greek government, and on and on and on. And yet we don't encourage our kids to enroll in modern Greek studies programs. And remember that, after all, modern Greek is a language accepted in,
in public schools,
in business, in the European community, and on and on and on. And we have different means of learning modern Greek today, not the antiquated stuff that they did through the alphabetarium and by illiterate teachers in many respects. Now we have the means. We can do it through distance education. We can do it through a university campus and so on. And that's, I think, a big weakness on the part of the Greek American community, that it has not encouraged their kids, when they go to the university, to go and take modern Greek as part of their foreign language.
How was the community responded during the junta years in
Well, that was, to a significant degree, it was a very difficult time for those of us that were dissidents. I have seen my file that the Greek embassy had on me that led to my court-martial and things like that. And people who pretended to be friends of mine had been writing notes to the Greek embassy, to the national government of Greece, about those bad people like me that were not supporting the junta. I can understand some of the problems that particularly communities in Indiana had. A lot of these Greek American communities, remember, came from Kastoria, Florina, the border areas of Yugoslavia and Bulgaria. And you very well know the history of those areas with the civil war. And even though in places like Florina and Kastoria, you have mixed marriages between Slav-speaking people and Greek-speaking people and all that, unfortunately, politics has taken over. And during the junta, there was a character that came out of the Greek consulate in Chicago by the name of Vergos, who spied on the community, who had Bulgarian connections and Bulgarian friends and things like that. And a lot of Greeks from Macedonia lost their properties, lost their Greek passport because of people who squealed on them. I ended up going through a court-martial in Greece in 1968 in January. Of course, the funniest thing about that was that when the summons came to Indiana for me to appear to the court-martial in Greece, it came about 3 months after I had been convicted in absentia, because by the time they could find where I live and send a letter with the summons and everything else, not that I would have gone to be tried by the Greek junta, but the funny thing was that I was tried in absentia and convicted. It took me until about 1976 to clear up my record. But in reality, the record was never cleared. In 2012, when the Greek government asked me to take over the ADIP, the accreditation agency of Greece, first thing I had to prove was Greek citizenship, because there's a Greek government agency and you had to prove Greek background. Well, I had lost my Greek passport, the last Greek passport I had. With all my moving around, I could not find it. And of course, even though my American passport says that I was born in Greece, that was not enough proof. I had to go through a confirmation hearing at the Greek parliament before I accepted the position of president of ADIP. It took several days with Arvanitopoulos, who was at the time Minister of Education, and the mayor of Athens, trying to figure out what happened to my Greek records, that I was born in Athens, Mitro Arenon. I did not exist. Well, when we discussed again what may have happened, and I told them about the court-martial, they had a bright idea and they said, oh, I think we know what may have happened. They threw your records out. And that's what they had done. And there's a warehouse outside of Athens where records of bad people like me are stored. And indeed, they found my records, my birth records and all that. And of course, they decided that I was now a good enough person, and they restored my records, and I was able to get proof of Greek citizenship and go through the confirmation hearing at the Greek parliament.
But nevertheless, you still felt that Greece was a second home, was part, like motherland. Still
yes, it is, and I still feel very strongly about it, even though I don't have any more family left. I'm the only one. And to tell you the truth, when I was in Athens during my service with ADIP, in many ways, I lived in Kolonaki, not far from where my house in Athens was. And I felt like a fish out of water. I was in Greece, and yet I knew Greece, I knew the neighborhood, I knew the area, but I also did not feel part of the area anymore. It was a very strange feeling. People are very hospitable. I had good friends in Athens. I revived a lot of old friendships, but I never felt at home anymore, partially because most of my family is also gone. And that's a strange feeling, to walk streets where you grew up and you're part of, and yet to feel that you really don't belong there anymore. A strange feeling, hard to explain.
And still, despite the fact of the notorious Greek bureaucracy or the ambivalence of who is a good citizen or a bad citizen in the case of Greece, depending misconceptions of understanding citizenship, etc. Still, you were awarded with one of the most prestigious decorations.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
I never knew that that decoration was coming. At that time, in, 1998, I was doing various reports for the BBC, mainly commentary on developments in Greece and in Cyprus. And on March the 25th of 1998, I got a call from the guy that I was working with in the BBC in London, who wanted to wish me for my name day and congratulate me for the great honor that was done for me by Greece. I didn't know what he was talking about. We went back and forth for about 5 minutes. He thought I was joking. I thought he was joking. And finally he says, you really don't know what happened to you in Greece today, did you? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, oh, let me read you the announcement from the Greek presidency. You and another 20 people, including the mayor of Mariupolis in Ukraine, that has been now destroyed, you have received this particular award. I didn't even know that they had done that. When I contacted the Greek embassy and the Greek consulate in Chicago, they said, well, we knew that, but of course, it was a recommendation that you received that award. And we could not tell you because if you did not receive it, everybody would be embarrassed. So therefore, now that it has happened, we'll have a big ceremony for you. And indeed they had, I was given a choice to either go to Greece or to go to Washington. I opted to stay with the ceremony in Chicago at the Greek consulate because my daughter was living in Chicago at the time, and it was easy for us to go to the Greek consulate in Chicago.
Very interesting. Since you mentioned in Ukraine now, I would like to go backwards to start with a very nice article that published. Now, tell us about AHI and your involvement with AHI, and this article where Russia's invasion of Ukraine parallels to Cyprus, because I would like, starting with the current situation now and contemporary events, to go backwards and talk about Turkey and the invasion of Cyprus, because you are an expert on writing and advocating against the invasion of Cyprus in 1974. So tell us a few things about AHI first, and then to continue with the debates you have all these years.
Let me tell you, I joined AHI in 1974, soon after the organization was founded, because I was very concerned about what was happening in Cyprus from 1963 on. And when the invasion came, I was part of the mobilization of the Greek American community that brought about the embargo and all the things that we saw during the 1970s. I felt that it was an important thing for me as an American citizen to be politically involved. Thanks to the friendship I had with Gene Rosidis encouraged me to join AHI in the effort, and we had to do a great deal of work, both from the academic standpoint, but also from a political standpoint, in creating the kind of material that had to be passed on to members of Congress, to the newspapers and things like that. So these are creative years in many ways. I was able to do as much as I could to help the cause of Cyprus, the cause of Greece. And it worked. I think it worked because we brought about the embargo and so on. Now, again, we saw through that the difficulties existing in the Greek American community as far as the mobilization activities and the personal differences within Greek American organizations that have limited the effectiveness of the Greek American lobby over the years.
This is a time when we have the beginning of the Greek lobby, right? After the Second World War, I think it is the first time that the Greek American community, people like you, helped to a larger, a more massive mobilization as political issues.
It was the first time in Greek American history that the Greek American community that took pride in its American character and American loyalty stood up against the policy of its government. That was significant. And it was successful because, thanks to Gene Rosidis, we developed the theme of the rule of law. It was not the interests of Greece. It was not the interests of Cyprus. It was an American policy issue that affected American policy. And we framed it in terms of American law. And that's why we were successful in the effort that we did with the US Congress.
So, given the opportunity to write again and think again because of the Ukraine issue now, how come you make the connection with the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974? How do you see connections there?
The connections are in many ways, very simple, although the problems cannot always be identical. We have a situation where a NATO member invaded a European country under the pretext of the Treaty of Guarantee and things like that, which we proved, of course, was inaccurate. But still, we had a NATO member occupying another European country, still occupying it. It carried out war crimes. We have the records of the people, prisoners of war, that were never allowed to return back to Cyprus because they were killed in Turkey. And Turkey has never allowed any examination of what happened to those people, because the Red Cross records that we have seen show us clearly that they were in the hands of the Turkish army, but they were never exchanged.
The Committee of Missing Persons, right?
The Committee of the Missing Persons has been set up. It's finally trying to operate, but it's operating under very difficult circumstances because of non-cooperation, particularly, not only in what excavations are being done for remains of Greek Cypriots in the occupied area, but the Committee on the Missing has never been allowed to examine jails and concentration camps that they had set up for the Greek prisoners of war in Turkey.
Yeah.
Turkey has never accepted any investigations there.
Sometimes you're very critical, not sometimes, all the time you're very critical, but I remember somewhere you write the double standards.
Yes.
Double standards.
Right now, for example, we're talking about crimes committed by the Russian army. I agree. They're killing innocent civilians. They've killed prisoners of war and all that. Now, what about those in the hands of Turkey? A NATO member occupying a member of the EU on top of that, and nobody's talking about that anymore. It's something that happened in the past, but it's not a past event. It's an event today. In the year 2022, 37% of the island of Cyprus is still under Turkish army occupation. And more than that, Turkey controls the government of the occupied areas. They have taken a piece of land out of an independent European country and proclaimed it as an independent state. Now, nobody recognizes it, but today we complain about the Russians having instigated Donetsk and a couple of other regions of Ukraine as seceding from Ukraine and becoming independent states. What about what is happening in the occupied part of Cyprus? Why isn't anybody talking about that? These are double standards.
I felt what you said, very heavily and very bitterly, the double standard comment that you have made. When a few days ago, President Biden warned Putin, don't even dare to touch an inch of NATO's land or air. So, and we see how empty or how double standards, those words are, because we have Turkey every other day. For years now, we have the, coming to the Greek islands, the air, the sea, the Cyprus issue. Do you think now it's a good moment for the Greek American community to use that, to start mobilizing again? Do you see any hope there? Is any prospects?
The prospects are not really that good. I'll be very honest. But if we don't talk about it, how do we expect others to take up our own cause? And part of the problem lies in Athens, part of the problem lies in Nicosia, and therefore I cannot blame Washington only. If we don't talk about what is happening to Cyprus today, what is happening in the Aegean today, we don't expect others to take up the cause for us.
But I'm interested to the Greek American community. For the first time, the American-born Greeks are numerically more, arithmetically, numerically, than the immigrant generation. do they listen? Do they care? Do they have a probability of organizing themselves, since they are the majority, and start a new movement regarding, because I understand it's very compatible to be Greek and American in those days, and also they are Americans of Greek descent. I understand that, but at the same time, they are the majority as far as concerned the 1.5 or 1.6 million Greeks in America. Do you think that the new generation can be interesting in mobilizing, in forming the new lobbies, forming the new movement?
Again, it depends how the issues are presented. If they're presented as pure Greek or Cypriot issues.
But who is going to present that? It is the school, the churches, it is the Greek government, it is the lobby.
No, it has to be the Greek American organizations like AHI that does perhaps some of the most significant work in that area. AHEPA that has a political arm in many ways. These are the groups that need to be conversant with the issue. First of all, to convince their own members that there is an issue that they need to be concerned about, and then putting the issue in terms of American interests and American policy, much as it was done with the embargo in 1974. It's a difficult task.
Since you mentioned HEPA, this year is the 100-year anniversary
right.
of the establishment of HEPA in 1922 in Atlanta, Georgia. And I guess they are in their celebratory mode, preparing for the convention this summer in Florida. Do you think that the Cyprus issue can be their agenda for the convention?
I have no idea. I have not seen what they're planning to discuss or what kind of presentations are they going to have. But IHEPA should be sensitive to what is happening in the area now, cooperate with AHI and all the organizations like Cypriot organizations and Greek organizations to mobilize again, because we need to be keeping these issues on the forefront.
Yeah, because that changes many other things. I want to go back and also connect what you're saying, all these very interesting things also with the Balkans, because I remember you said many times that Greece at some point was the only Balkan country that was also a member of the European Union and NATO a member. Not anymore, but for a long time it was. So how the new world order, let's say how the Ukraine issue and what happened to the former Yugoslavia, the collapse of the Soviet Union, how that redesigns the strategic position of Greece. Is Greece still a country with this strategic geopolitical position?
Yes, in many ways it is. And the strategic role changes as the issues change. But right now, with the kind of instability you have in the Middle East, Greece has become a pivot of American policy in the Eastern Mediterranean. Suda Bay has become a major center of American military policy. Alexandroupolis has become a major center of American activity. Some of the islands in the Aegean are becoming now centers of American military strategy. So yes, the conditions may change. The strategic significance changes nature, but we have to be able to promote and explain that strategic significance to third parties.
Do you see Greece as a serious agent to carry those political, significant issues, or Greece is just a minor player to all this, just following, in the orbit of dependency, in the order of waiting or being over patient, etc.?
in many ways, again, Greece is not a major power. We know that militarily, financially, or anything. But it occupies a very significant strategic space. The EU has the ability to provide information, to provide ideas, to provide alternatives by being a member of an active political, economic, security organization. So being small, being weak does not necessarily mean you're helpless and you just rely on what others do on your behalf. It'll take some imaginative policy on the part of Greece, and not just simply saying we belong to the West. Anikome isti Disi, the famous saying that we've had for years and years. We belong, but we also need to be recognized for what we do at great economic, political, and security risk over the years.
Very, very interesting. Also, I would like to come back because unless you want to add some more later on the geostrategic position, the policies that you write, for so many years extensively. But I would like also to make a comparison or some parallels between the different academic environments and institutions, because also you taught in Cyprus. I would like to and see Athens, the States, Cyprus. Try to connect those different experiences, some similarities and differences.
Let's put it this way: the administrative experience I had in the US gave me knowledge of how to deal with university-related administrative issues. But taking that knowledge and applying it to a specific context is a different story, because Greece is different, Cyprus is different. My work in Cyprus was a lot different than my work in Greece, a lot easier than my work in Greece. Cyprus has an English tradition that has affected a great deal of what how the bureaucracy operates, how the system operates, and so on. One of the things that I need to say is that when I first went to Cyprus, I had two tasks. One was the reorganization of what existed as Intercollege, a 4-year private college in Nicosia, and trying to put an academic structure that universities would have and be part of private university down the road. The other task I had was that I had to work with the political system in Cyprus to change the university law to provide for private universities. In Greece, this is a major issue. Cyprus had also a similar problem. One of the reasons why they wanted me to go to Cyprus was because I had good political connections with the island. So the first couple of years of my work in Nicosia was what I would call lobbying, meeting with political leaders, from heads of parties to members of academic policy committees and things like that, trying to work with them and convince them that a private university is not a sin, and that a private university can coexist along with public universities. It worked. It took us about 2 years to get the law changed. And there's still some weaknesses along the way, but we're able to do something that people never believed was possible. But thanks to a lot of personal connections, a lot of meetings and lots of cups of coffee, we were able to do that. Then the task became of the internal organization of what was to become a private university, because Intercollege as a private college had a structure, but all this structure, all the policies had to be rewritten from promotion and tenure down to academic policies, you name it. So we reorganized the institution, wrote new academic policies. So by the time came for accreditation, we had both the law changed for private universities and to the institution that was ready to meet European accreditation standards. It took about 6 years. Now, for Cyprus, that was an achievement. It's something that I don't think can happen in Greece in the same time period. Cyprus was more receptive to the idea of creating quality accredited private universities. They have about 5 of them now.
Because for a long time, the British government didn't allow
Right.
the operation of university in Cyprus, right? Part of
You know, the thing that I saw in Greece in particular is that, of course, private universities now are springing up all over the place, particularly those that are of European origin, capitalizing on European Union regulations and therefore bypassing the prohibition on private universities in Greece. It's a great idea because Greek bureaucracy and the Greek political system don't work very easily. They have stereotypes about private universities that are antiquated, but still the stereotypes are there. The issue to me is that we need to start aiming for quality in the private higher education, because a lot of those outfits that have come from England and from Germany and places like that, really, I would not even send my cat to them to study. They take a lot of money, they exploit the Greek interest in getting a foreign degree, but they're not quality institutions. This is why Greece needs to wake up and face to the reality of what happens to quality private tertiary education. Cyprus did it. Greece, time has come to do the same.
Some scholars argue that for a long time now it is an attempt to somehow, I don't want to defame, but somehow not to give a lot of credit to the public universities in Greece in order, to minimize their importance. Although we know that during the crisis year, a lot of doctors or other professionals who studied and finished Greek universities, they do excellent and they are in high demand. So we have to decide, do we have a good public educational system or not? As you said, we have to decide and make some,
The years that I spent with Adip in Athens were eye-opening. Greek universities have a lot of strengths. They have quality faculty, no question about it. At the same time, that doesn't mean that every department, every university, so-called university, are of the same standing and the same quality. One of the tasks that Adip had was to do the evaluation of Greek universities. Anybody that has worked in an American university knows that annual evaluations are part of the drill. Accrediting associations play a role every 7 to 10 years in accrediting universities. There's nothing wrong with that. Self-examination of your performance is nothing wrong. But trying to tell that to Greek bureaucrats in universities is easier to commit suicide than convince them that it's to their benefit. When Adip did the first reorganization scheme, Plan Athena, over reorganizing some of the higher education, I had some of the most incredible experiences. People lining up to see me in my office on Leoforos in Grou, people ranging from mayors of cities to priests, bishops, political figures. How dare you tell us that you may be closing a department and a program? One day, the funniest experience was the guy was very honest with me. He said, look, if they close this particular TI, what am I going to do? I said, what do you mean? He says, I have a Cafe Neo, right across the street from the TI. And if you shut them down, you shut down my business. And I tried to explain to him that nobody's going to try to take away his business. We're trying to create quality so that he has business in that particular area. But trying to sell reorganization, academic reorganization, was a major task. I think it's a little easier to do that now, and the economic crisis forced a lot of the issues to the forefront. But to tell you, the Greek system has quality at many levels, but it's also very perplexing at other levels. Try to find enrollment data from a Greek university. It's easier to discover top secret nuclear plants from Russia and the US than real data, enrollment data from Greek universities. I challenge you, take the time to see real figures, not the cosmetic figures that they give you, that our records show that we have 25,000 students.
Interesting.
Fiction.
Tell us now, where do you live now? And describe a typical day of a well-read scholar, a traveler of the world, a citizen of the world. What is a typical day for you now? What do you do?
I retired 3 times. I retired in 2002 from Indiana University. I retired in 2007 from Cyprus, and at the end of 2014 from Greece, from Athens. So I have retired 3 different times in my career. I'm now 84 years old.
I guess this is not exactly true because you keep writing and saying things and provoking. Yes. So it's not exactly
just life changes. We decided to move away from Indiana down to Florida because the weather is better, warmer, sunnier, and no more snow and cold as we used to have up in the Midwest of the US. The difficulty of the last couple of years, COVID, in the sense that my life has been travel, the ability to be able to go to Europe, to Australia. I've done some 10, 11 trips to Australia for lectures and spent a lot of time in that wonderful place. Cyprus was my backyard in many ways. I was there at least once a year, if not more often. Greece, the same kind of thing. I have not been able to travel for more than 2 years now. To me, that's devastating. The good thing is we have Zoom, and at least it allows us to have that kind of communication and to be able to air positions and discuss with people, but it's not the same like the face-to-face meetings that I used to have before. That's something I miss. And unfortunately, as the years go by, travel is likely to become harder because the older we get, travel is not as easy as it may have been when I was in my 20s and 30s and 40s, you know. But we take each day as it comes, happy in what we have achieved and happy with what I've been able to contribute since my formal retirement from formal employment.
I would like to comment on the Zoom thing that you mentioned. At least it's something, and what we learn during the COVID years, it is uh, or what we experience rather, is that even education or the concept of work is not any longer the same. A lot of people work from home, from distance. The same with education. You, as an experienced teacher all these years, how do you see that? Is this the future of education, and it is something that
If it is, it's very sad. I'm glad in many ways that I don't have to teach anymore because I'm not a distance education type. I like the face-to-face meeting with students, the interaction with students and faculty and colleagues in general. And to me, distance education does not do the same kind of thing in learning, in experiencing, in helping people. So in that sense, I miss teaching. I miss the contact with the students, but I'm glad I don't have to do this distance education. I don't think it's a good method of communication.
also I would like your comment about the vote. Recently, again, uh, for within the Greek American community is a debate. It is a plan to have the ability to vote from the place of living instead of just traveling to Greece. And also, how do you see the participation of the Greek American community in Greek elections?
I'm a US citizen. I chose to be a US citizen. If, excuse me, even if I had the ability to vote in Greek elections, I would never, ever vote in Greek elections. Greeks ought to be voting for their political institutions, even though I'm Greek born. I live in the US, I work in the US, and I'm concerned about things in Greece, but I don't live in Greece. Greeks ought to decide for themselves who is to govern them, not Greek Americans or Australian Greeks or anybody else.
In Florida, it's also a Greek American community. Are you in contact with any Greek Americans there? How do you see the Greeks in Florida in comparison to other cities?
It depends what part of Florida you're in. Tarpon Springs in the West Coast is the classic case of an early Greek American community, Sfougarades, who came from Kalymnos primarily. And of course, unfortunately, climate change, pollution has put them out of business. Tarpon Springs is still an active Greek American community, but mainly restaurants and shops, things like that. They still do sponge diving tours and things like that, but it does not have the charm that it had once upon a time. The community that I live in, Sarasota, is a mixed community. I would say probably about 60% Greek American. The rest is probably Lebanese in background, Maronite Lebanese. We have a number of Ukrainians and Russians that are also Russian in background. An interesting community. It does a very beautiful festival every February. It has a very nice church, actually with mosaics that you don't even find in Greek churches anymore. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. The community in many ways is different than what I have been used to living in the Midwest, partially because, again, in this community here, there is a lot of turnover. You have people who spend winters in Florida and go away for the summer in another part of the US. So there is a lot of turnover in the community, and I never really got to know the community as well as I did when I was in Indiana, for example.
Excellent. Van, it is such a great pleasure talking with you, and we can have a 10-hour discussion here. But unfortunately, we have to conclude this for now, and I hope soon that you can come to New York and have an event with you at Queen's College and CUNY. But in closing our discussion today, I would like to for you to give an advice to a young, let's say, is a young academic now who wants he or she to start their careers. What do you recommend? I mean, since you have this tremendous experience in different positions and in different eras, and also your general thoughts about the future of Hellenism in America.
We just published a book, a collective volume of articles on the Greek Americans, the future of the Greek American community, the result of conferences that the American Hellenic Institute did for about 15 years on that topic. The future of the Greek American community really depends on the Greek Americans, who need to think twice about where they fit in the American community, the issue of language, the issue of religion. There are a lot of good things that have happened to this Greek American community. Remember, those Greek Americans who came here in the 1920s, 1930s, faced a lot of discrimination. That's why AHEP was created in 1922. They faced riots in the West. All sorts of bad things happened to them. But that community grew, developed, and today we have a community that has a very high standard of education. Look at the data on PhDs. We're involved in every part of American life: sciences, business, education. Every field you have Greeks dominating and doing very well. We have to start thinking then in our communities, where does being Greek, being Orthodox, being American, how those things tie together? And I think the responses vary from place to place, from community to community, but it's up to us to take on that task. And if we believe that Greek America has a future, the future does not depend on what Greece does. The future depends on what we as Americans of Greek background do. We are connected now better than ever before. If Greece wants to implement a cultural diplomacy towards the Greek American community, the methods are there. Look at what the American Jewish community does with Israel, the Goethe Institute with Germany, the British Council with Britain. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Technology today allows for cross-cultural mobilization and for things that don't really cost that much money. What impressed me the 2.5, 3 years that I worked in Greece was the rich cultural life of modern Greece today, from theater to the sciences, you name it. The communities here have to realize that, because Greece is not just Souvlaki and Sirtaki. There is a great deal that modern Greece offers, both culturally, politically, socially, and that's what our task as academics should be, to try to connect those elements together, because that's what will keep the Greek American community alive. Can't hear you.
I would like your advice, to young academics, since you've been and still are a great teacher. What do you advise to them?
Look, the study of Greece is important, but don't necessarily try to make Greece as the only focus, the only focal point of your work. There are various ways by which you can connect into things Greek, both the literary sector, political sector, history, and things like that. Partially because, again, American universities today are going through a major financial crisis. And the social sciences in particular, the humanities even more so. So it's up to us to be able to connect other areas of expertise that we have and be able to connect with things that we can do to promote Greek studies. Having modern Greek studies programs is wonderful. I urge the Greek American community to take advantage of those programs, but also for the administration of those programs to cast a broad net and try to provide a broader image of what Greece today is in the 21st century.
Thank you very much. Today's discussion with Dr. Van Coufoudakis of the Hellenic American Project, Queen's College CUNY. We are honored and again, very happy that we have this discussion, Van. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. It has been a good experience. Let's continue talking about these things.